So first of all, thanks for joining us obviously this afternoon. Um, our presentation is on the subject of ISO certifications more than just a badge. So we'll hopefully delve in quite a bit of detail to the benefits of the standards, which tend to be the most popular ones out there. I'm Kim Van Dier. I've been working with QMS for nearly 4 years now. Historically, I was a head of quality in industry, and then I moved over to work with QMS, as I say, just about 4 years ago. I'm working on a range of standards. So all the big popular ones that you'll have heard of that we'll talk about this afternoon, like 9001, 14001, 45001, 27001. I cover all of those standards and some more besides. But as I say, there's time for you to ask questions as well at the end. You'll see the question mark that appears, which is what you click on if you want to ask any questions. And those can either be addressed in the forum at the end of the meeting. We'll probably go for about an hour, and then we'll have some time for questions after that. And if it's a question that you'd rather put in a private forum, that's just to marketing@qmsuk.com. What else to say at this point? You'll receive a set of the slides within 48 hours of the presentation as well. So if you want to revisit it in your own time, as I say, then great, you can. And perhaps that also saves you taking as many copious notes as well. That's always a good thing, isn't it? Okay, fantastic. Well, hopefully, as I say, we're now in a position to begin. So just to give you a bit of an overview of what I'm going to try and cover this afternoon, quite a lot in here, and we'll see if we get any interesting questions at the end as well. So we're thinking about what are ISOs, what are international standards, and what can they do for us? So when we talk about business benefits, we've broken it down there, and I think there's quite a big focus on productivity and efficiency. We also have the kind of flip side of that, I suppose. So money that we do not have to spend is effectively almost money that we have made. So we'll talk about cost savings as well. Last two there as well, customer satisfaction. Yep, it's a mandatory requirement of the standard that we have some mechanism to gauge feedback. What do our customers think of us? So we'll talk about that in a bit of depth. And resilience and adaptability. Oh, never has there been a more appropriate time to be talking about such things as we hopefully are now coming out of the pandemic era, or certainly the first stages of it. Okay. External advantages. So what can ISOs do for you? And again, focusing on sort of commercial viability, perhaps winning tenders, perhaps being able to even just submit more tenders because the process is a little bit more streamlined, and marketing your successes. That's probably, I mean, I don't know, for some organizations, perhaps it is the main reason that they go for the standard. But as I say, being able to have the badge on the wall is probably a reason for some clients that go for the standards. Hopefully lots of other benefits besides, but there will be that one. And the benefits of the standards that everybody has heard of, we'll go into those, and I'll perhaps try and give some examples as well. Obviously, there may be questions around that. We'll take those later. Okay, fantastic. So let's think about, first of all, what ISOs are for, what standards are for. So the descriptions there is that it brings structure, facilitates decision making, and brings the team together to drive improvement. So that idea almost of fostering an improvement culture, which I think is one of the things that we try and implement when we pay the money, put the resource out there, and try and implement an international standard. I mean, the description there, which I quite like, to describe the best way of doing something. So an ISO basically lays out or sets out requirements around specific areas of service delivery or product production, whatever it is that you do. Do you deliver services? Do you make things? Is it a combination of both of those things? Do you offer maintenance services? So I think really what we're saying there is all this is achieved, though, through a set of principles. The standards that we're talking about, the international standards, are rarely very prescriptive, but they do lay out principles to be followed. And there's some commonality in the principles, again, across lots and lots of standards, certainly the 4 that we're talking about today. And it is things like you need to have a way to fix problems. You need to have a way to gauge whether or not you're delivering the right type of service for your customer. You need to have a way of looking at your standard or looking at your system and seeing whether or not it meets the requirements of your business. All of these things are common across all the standards, and they're also kind of just intuitively, I think, the sorts of things that we know we should do, the kinds of things that we know will make our businesses or organizations better. I suppose here where we talk about what systems could be like for you, what your management system would be like compared to another organization, we're quite mindful of the fact that system complexity can and should be variable. So there is no cookie cutter, this is what your management system will be like, and it will be very similar to the man or woman next door's. It doesn't really work like that. So part of what we're trying to do is evoke and meet the requirements of the standard, but in a way which is appropriate and suitable for your organization. And if you can imagine a one-woman artisanal producer of X, Y, and Z, whatever, is going to be markedly different from a blue chip organization providing financial services to the international market. Those are completely different. They will both want to cover some of the same areas, but chances are they'll do them in completely different ways. So it would be ridiculous to suggest that the same methods and controls would fit both of those organizations. So that's really what we're saying there as well. One of the things which you should almost lay down, I think, from the outset, but sometimes it's not always very well reflected. Really what we're trying to do here is find pathways to meet our goals and objectives. So in other words, we set out on page 1, what is it we're trying to do in terms of profitability, what the business will be like, what type of client base we're going to serve. And then we set some measures around that. How will we know if we've achieved it? By looking at the profit and loss sheet? Yeah, maybe. By looking at the number of hubs that we now have in, I don't know, whichever part of the world you're looking to perhaps grow the business in. These are all quite measurable, and in some ways quite kind of binary ways to say, yes, we achieved it, or no, we didn't. What are we going to do about it? But I think really what we're saying is that ISOs kind of exist partly to help us achieve our objectives and goals. And if they don't do that, then maybe we're not using them correctly. As I say, the objective setting piece is so fundamental, and I think so important to what standards should be in our world. So if we move on to another concept, which again, I think is very important and not always particularly well understood, this concept of being on a journey toward improvement. So what we're trying to say here, almost, it sounds a bit counterintuitive, because surely having management systems and working in accordance with standards is all about perfection, right? Well, maybe discuss. So what we say is that management systems are never finished. Management systems are never perfect. We're just making fine adjustments all the time to get to a place where we are closer to our intended aim and objective. So it's almost like, and I use the analogy again of I was going to say the jetliner. Can anybody remember what it's like to be on a plane? The scenario basically where the ship or the plane is constantly making minor adjustments to its course to reach its final destination. And that is exactly what management systems are like. So we basically say that we're on the journey toward continuous improvement. We haven't reached it, because it's almost like as soon as we reach it, as soon as we reach that point, we look up to the horizon and there's a new set of objectives or a new means to improve, which has magically become revealed to us. So I think that's quite an important kind of concept. I mean, I think too, it's not a straight line journey. So management systems, if you imagine initially when they're launched, they're new, they're fresh, the people who are using them perhaps are a bit inexperienced. We're quite excited about what we want to achieve, but we might not have the kind of level of skill yet of somebody who's been working with management systems for a longer time period. So we maybe try and achieve quite a lot quite quickly. We achieve most of it, but there are still some gaps. We maybe come to our first annual surveillance audit, and in fact, we've got some NCRs, we've got some problems arising. okay, so we're mostly there, but we still need to take some action to fix things and kind of bring us back into line, back onto that course again that we talked about. And then perhaps the next year, COVID hits, or the senior management change, or we lose our experienced quality manager, or something else happens and perhaps the system performance drops off a little bit. But then the next year, we're back after COVID. We've recruited some new staff, we've reinvigorated the system, and everything starts to improve again. So again, it's this concept of moving toward greatness, but it's not something that you turn on and turn off. We drive toward improvement, and that's what we seek to do all the time. I think there's a good point well made here as well about how management systems can basically be used to bring teams together, and I think to try and give them a bit of a structure to drive organizational improvement as well. So we do talk about developing managers and people who are involved in implementing management systems. So really quality managers, operational managers, people at a lower level as well, people who are just operators, as I say, or people who maybe have a less directly involved relationship with the management system. But everybody has ideas, or potentially may have ideas, about how the business can improve, how the management system can improve, how we can be more effective, how we can perhaps waste fewer materials, how we can streamline certain processes. The people who are often best in a position to advise on that is the people who are closely applied to the processes. So again, just by having that structure and by having a means to gather information from the wider staff body and communicate information out to interested parties, internal and external, hopefully that's what kind of helps us achieve that piece as well. We talk about highlighting the importance of roles and responsibilities. So in other words, sometimes if people aren't very clear on what their responsibilities are, they're maybe a bit less likely to actually fulfill those and produce good results. So I think management systems, again, really force us to think about roles and responsibilities. Who's heading this up? Who's going to be the champion? Effectively, who's going to get the applause if it's a great success, and who might not receive that level of accolade if it all goes badly wrong. But without associating tasks to users, I think, again, it's quite difficult to achieve that. Enhancing employee understanding of business processes, I think that's a really good one. And we'll talk later on in the presentation about this idea of kind of getting up close and personal with your business, and maybe using the process of putting management systems in place to kind of really come to grips with and understand where there's room for improvement, where there is duplication of effort, doubling handling of data, the opportunity for, I suppose, human error to creep in, where an improvement to process might kind of remove that from the equation, as it were. But we have all these good things to come. Okay, fantastic. So just so that everybody is kind of called back to order again, and we'll think about what the standards, the big ticket ones, the ones that everybody's heard of, what actually are these? Because I think sometimes people get a bit confused between which one is which. So broadly, we're going to say 9001, that's kind of your core, your key standard. It's operational, and it thinks about what you do to meet users' or clients' needs and how you improve that over time. I mean, effectively, that's what 9001 is and does. 14001 is a standard which basically thinks about environmental impact. It doesn't mean that you have to go out and buy 10 electric vehicles. It doesn't mean that you necessarily take lots and lots of expensive action around environment and sustainability. But it does mean that you consider quite carefully the possible ramifications of emergency events related to environmental matters like spills, pollution of a watercourse, that type of thing. And critically, that you just consider in the round the ways that you impact the environment by, for example, I mean, I'm standing here with 2 electric lights on behind me in the middle of the afternoon because it's quite dark in my kitchen. So we use resources. We, keep the heating on so that we don't freeze. We keep the lights on so that we can see what we're doing. All of these things are using the Earth's natural resources. So as I say, we kind of think about that as well. 14001 is a great standard. I mean, it's, I think, the natural bedfellow to 9001. A lot of organizations seem to go for both of those together, but again, they obviously work as standalones. 27001, I suppose, almost is like the hot topic standard of the moment. Information security is incredibly important to a lot of organizations. particularly maybe organizations which either are very data rich or have had recent breaches or are getting nervous about their market position and thinking this could be the thing that brings us down. So 27001, all about information security. There's areas of overlap with GDPR requirements, but they are not the same thing. 45001, so this used to be, I suppose, or it grew out of a standard called 18001, which was very popular in the market for a long time. When that standard was rewritten, it was renumbered. So the both occupational safety and health standards, but 45001, as I say, was kind of reimagined, and I think is a really great standard too. If you imagine 45001 is a standard which kind of sits on top of your existing behavioural health and safety system. So in other words, it's almost like the layer of, I don't know, royal icing on the wedding cake or whatever. It will reference the arrangements that you make to health and safety, but chances are those are actually two entities that cross over, but they are separate things. Just a bit of a kind of health warning. Oh, there you go, a bit of a pun around that and what 45001 can do for you. Okay, so let's think then about when I alluded earlier to that concept of basically using an approach to a management system, implementing a management system as perhaps the impetus to use some tools to get to know your business. So there's lots of areas in which we can use tools, and organizations may already be using some of these, yet they are not on the pathway particularly to implementing a management system. But we talk about, I suppose, the good outcomes of carrying this out. So it's kind of around the key areas there. So productivity and efficiency, customer satisfaction, and resilience and adaptability. I mean, I think these are all really significant areas. The area, I suppose, of resilience and adaptability, and it's the last section here that we'll come to, but you might say, is that the one that's the most topical at the moment? If we think about businesses which have exemplified resilience, so the restaurant that now does high quality home deliveries of food, or everybody can rhyme off examples, the consultancy which previously did 100% face-to-face consultations, but which is now offering, remote consultancies to people who prefer them as a means of, again, prevention from COVID infection. These are all kind of good examples of where businesses have gone on, I think, to perhaps be in a better position in some cases than they were at the outset of the pandemic. But let's delve in. We'll look at productivity and efficiency first. Probably most straightforwardly, as I say, I think, again, things that organizations are all tending to try and move toward. So the scenario here is, why do we want to be more productive? Why do we want to be more efficient? So effectively to become better businesses, to be more sustainable, to be more secure, to be more cost effective. Yes, I think all of those things are true. I mean, I suppose for me, these might be around things like reducing replication, because it is quite interesting when you look at organizations, new organizations, more mature ones, quite often, if there's not perhaps a good degree of kind of transparency around who's doing what, you will find that multiple departments are, using similar data maybe to produce a similar set of information for analysis, for decision making, and you think, my goodness, they're doing almost exactly the same thing with the same pool of data. Could you not do it once? Could you, free up that person to do something, that might benefit the business in a different way? I think also for me, it's all about reducing the scope for error. And if you think about the types of errors that can creep in, what's going to lend itself to that? So you might say, if you've got people who are having to get involved in a lot of very manual processes. So, this could be like a physical production process, which is quite manual. It's not mechanized in any way. Like, we actually use human hands to do this. There's potentially a bit of scope for things to go wrong there. Humans get tired and distracted in a way that machines just don't. Other areas there again, so you can imagine when people are stressed, when people are working in an environment which perhaps isn't as suitable as maybe their fantastic, well, their large desk in the office, which has got 2 nice big screens, you know, coffee maker behind them and chatty colleagues who are going to kind of keep them motivated and inspired to do a great job. So you've now taken that person and they're working from their living room sort of, or their kitchen table, and perhaps trying to homeschool some people at the same time, maybe thinking back to the pandemic here. But I suppose we're really just trying to say, how can we make the process better so that we strip out the scope for unnecessary error, the scope for unnecessary replication. I mean, this slide also, again, brings us back to this idea of really nailing down who's got responsibility for what, who does what part of the process, because processes can get a bit blurry around the edges. I might think it's definitely not my job to do that, but the person who gets a hold of my whatever next, my set of data, or the, I don't know, injection plastic mold that I've just produced to carry out the next stage in the process, if he thinks I've done such and such a process and he doesn't have to, you can see where there's just a bit of scope for that to go wrong. Understanding the stage of processes. So, you know, generally organizations do operate processes, they carry out activities, those will happen in an order which is ideal. Again, usually that's quite prescriptive, and it's one of the first things that we kind of flesh out when we're doing consultancy, for example. So that's like the discovery phase. Tell me about your business. What happens first? What happens then? And then when that's complete, what happens next? So we're kind of just trying to understand what processes need to happen in what order. And also critically, the outputs of what process maybe lead into the next process. So those outputs become inputs in the next sort of piece of work. How well processes perform, I suppose, yeah, what's your failure rate? What's your scrappage rate? How often does it need to be done again? How often does the line fail? How often does the report get rejected? How often is the data found to be corrupt, etc., etc.? So thinking about all of these good things. And also just thinking about ways to make it better, this scenario, so that we can think about opportunities for improvement, again, which is absolutely central to exactly what we're trying to achieve with the implementation of management systems. Okay. So we've talked about some of these concepts already, this idea of repeatability. So in other words, when we have a process which is quite nicely defined, it means that we have already established the best way to do something, the best sequencing, the best personnel, the skills required, the materials required, maybe the timescale, the environment, the safety controls, all of that good stuff. So we do that once and we kind of think about that's the optimum way, and then we just do that until we find a way to improve it further. But this idea of repeatability, and I suppose also, I mean, if you want to take it to the extreme, like the use of checklists, even for quite complex processes, this idea that we always do it the same so that the outcomes are more predictable and there's chances are scope for things to be wrong or to be non-standard or to be different, or for us to have to explain to the client that for some reason the object is now, I don't know, come out too big, too small, with a different concentration of material in it. You can imagine the different scenarios where, you know, sometimes the client will say, fine, I don't care, but you can imagine a scenario where the client's saying, okay, so I ordered them to be the same shade of light blue as, you know, the last time I ordered this product a year ago. Are they not now the same? Because I can't, you know, basically just distribute these in the same way. I would have to discount them. Then you would have to discount them to me, or I'm going to reject them. So you can see again, I think, how that would work. So we're really just trying to basically, reduce wastage, reduce error. And if you think about the kind of human cost, if you like, or the human benefit of improving productivity and efficiency, we're less stressed. We know what we're doing. We're not worried about having to go to the boss and say, you know, it's gone wrong again. All of those things just create, I think, a more harmonious, and I was going to say a harmonious workplace, and also less staff churn. So you can imagine people who work in organizations that have got well-run management systems, you know, really getting to the point where they feel quite comfortable in the jobs and being able to put resource into improvement rather than firefighting. Because I think everyone's got a war story. Everyone's worked for an organization that was just a bit disorganized, and it was kind of different every day, and we didn't really know what we were doing very well. The training wasn't great. There wasn't very much supervision. So that's really what we're trying to move away from. Just this idea that, I suppose, there's no system, there's no process, there isn't a right way. We're almost literally reinventing the wheel every time we carry out a process, which is an enormous waste of resource. Okay, fantastic. So let's think about fixing problems. This is quite a good one. So some people on the call may have heard of the Deming cycle, Plan, Do, Check, Act. And this is absolutely fundamental to management systems and standards across the world. So this idea, Plan, Do, Check, Act. Oh, getting a dodgy internet warning. Hopefully I can still be heard and seen. Great. Okay. So Plan, Do, Check, Act is the scenario that we don't just wire on in there. We have a thought about what activities we're going to carry out. We think about how we're going to do them, what materials we're going to use. We perhaps base some of that planning on what we know has gone wrong before so that we can be a bit proactive. Doing, so again, we're actually going to carry out the activity. We're going to think about that activity, start, middle, end, inputs, outputs. What do we want to achieve from it? We're then going to check the effectiveness of the activity. So did we have a lot of wastage? Did we have a lot of downtime? Did the machine break? Did the operator make a mistake? Was the quality assurance checking actually helpful? That does the process work, basically? And then act on our findings. So Plan, Do, Check, Act. Act is the bit when you can say, okay, next time we will do something differently. If indeed we've established the need for an improvement in the process, which sometimes we will, hopefully most of the time we won't, but that cycle just continues to run and it never stops. So that's really when we talk about this kind of driving continuous improvement, this is what we mean, because we never say it's great, it can't get any better than this, it's perfect already. We never say that. We always come back to this idea of Plan, Do, Check, Act so that we can continually improve. What we say, I think, in this scenario as well, so management systems are around identifying potential problems and real problems. And where we talk about non-conformity, non-conformance, NCR, NC report, NC, all this terminology means exactly the same thing. And it's basically talking about an event which was not as planned. So it's an event which has taken place and the outcome is something other than was the intended output. So, you know, the object that's come out light blue from your production process and it should have been, I don't know, French Navy. The report that's come out missing some data. The staff member that's been sent on a training course that's come out unable to answer basic questions about the discipline they've allegedly been trained in. These are all NCRs. So we kind of think about those. And again, things go wrong. This is the real world. Nothing's perfect all the time. But NCR management is all about, I suppose, really damage limitation as well. So this thing did happen. This unintended event did happen, but we managed to catch it because we've got a robust quality assurance process in place. So we caught it before the customer got a hold of it and lost faith in us and cancelled future orders and struck us from the, you know, preferred suppliers list or whatever. So that's really what we're thinking about there. Sorry, I'm labouring this slide slightly, but I do think it is quite important. What I quite like with this slide as well, so we talk about finding permanent solutions to non-conformity or non-conformance. So in other words, everyone has been in the scenario where you just need a quick fix. You just need it to work to the end of the day. You just need that guy to finish his shift, or you just need whatever, and it's a very, very short-term fix. And it can be quite an expensive fix, but we just need to make this problem vanish for the next 6 hours, then we'll really address it. And I think really, again, what quality management systems and implementing ISOs is all about is saying, I will fix it forever. not I will fix it for now. Now that sounds quite, it's quite odd language to use about this idea that we're fixing problems, because it isn't that what we go to work to do every day. And to an extent, I mean, it absolutely is. But I think what management systems force us to do is to look in quite an analytical way and think about when problems arise, what was the root cause? You know, is this likely to happen again? What's almost like the worst case scenario? You know, could this have gone unchecked? The customer could have opened up the first box, looked at it and thought, never buying from them again, or whatever. So this is really the scenario around non-conformance management. And we talked there about the scenario of creating a problem-solving or an improvement-focused culture, which again, that's very, very fundamental to what management systems are all about. And I think, like any kind of business skill, the more you do it, the better at it you become. And I think that's why when you meet quality managers down the pub, so if you talk to me in a kind of non-business environment, my whole mindset is about how do we make things better. It's always about improvement. That's impossible to switch that off. So if you can imagine the power that that gives you, if that's part of what your business culture is like, if people don't just go through their working lives going, it's all right, it's fine, they'll never notice. I mean, that gets you so far, but imagine if you had a culture where everybody was constantly focusing on fixing things, solving problems, improving things over the longer term. I think that's probably something that we would all like to sort of perhaps aim for a bit more than we perhaps do every day. Okay, fantastic. So we're still on productivity and efficiency. And we're thinking now about two tools, which again, probably most people who are at all schooled in management systems will be very, very familiar with. So internal audit and management review, those old two faves again. So as some people will no doubt be aware, we've got internal audits as being almost like a temperature check. So it's a scheduled, regular check of processes. Are we following the processes? Are they as they are documented? Are the processes right? Are they producing the right results? Do people like them? Do people feel confident this is the best way to do things? So it's almost that kind of two-way interaction as well. So audits are not a telling off exercise. It's not an opportunity to get people. It's an opportunity to look dispassionately at processes and say, are we following them? And if so, are they right? Is this the right sort of thing to do? Or in fact, is there a system improvement we could introduce, in which case, let's start considering that just now. Management review it's an activity which I always think is quite closely tied to internal audit, because chances are you do some work, you do some internal audits, you produce some reports, and then you've got some data. You've literally got something to bring to management review. So you would almost say management review is like the sit-down opportunity to say, how is the system working? But in order to do that effectively, you need some data. You need to have something to look at to guide you. You need some evidence upon which to base your decisions. So internal audit gives you the evidence. Management review is this structured forum whereupon, typically at a minimum once a year, a lot of organizations do it 6 monthly, some do it 12 monthly. You look at the management system and you say, is it still fit for purpose? Does it do what I wanted it to do when I bought it or when I implemented it? So again, just a couple of thoughts there about almost at a minimum, if you do nothing else, if you did a really good set of internal audits, if you carried out management review with full engagement from the right people at the right tiers of the organization, you know, you'd be doing pretty well. Those are two very powerful tools, I think, to drive improvement and generate, hopefully, increased productivity and efficiency. Okay, so we've got some examples here. So this is almost like a kind of lead out benefit from implementing ISOs. So if we think about what are ISOs based on, data, because we need to know how good we are now. We need to benchmark, and then we need to look at performance over time and saying, are the actions that we're taking making things better or worse? Can we continue as we are? Do we need to change things? Do we need to allocate more resource? So the scenario here, thinking about basically what you need for an ISO, so accurate reporting and documentation. And you can imagine again, so depending on the standard you're working toward, so it could be operational data, could be health and safety data, by which I mean number of RIDDORs, number of lost time accidents, number of days since the last accident, number of near misses, number of, I don't know, fully completed risk assessments submitted by X manager on Y month or whatever. If you were to think about this in the context of 14,001, you might say, okay, so the volume or weight of waste which was handled in, it was being properly segregated. It didn't just all go to general waste. So you're almost just thinking about numbers basically, and using numbers, using data to establish, so what resources you've got, what you're using, the degree of waste that you may be generating. That can be a bit of a painful one, but again, essential to know so that you can act on it. What things are worth, so the value of a day's consultancy, the value of a consignment of reclaimed metal, all of these things, again, it's very difficult to make decisions if you don't have data. And again, hopefully ISO's driving us toward that, building up a data pool upon which we can make good decisions. And the efficiency of processes as well. I mean, you would almost say number 5 is derived from the previous 4. And the example that this gives here, so again, it's probably quite a good example. So production of scrap. And again, this is different in different types of industries. And I suppose immediately you think, scrap and waste materials. You could also almost apply this though to within a kind of like a service environment as well. So this is almost like this is failed appointments or wastage, so that the client has maybe backed out of the process partway through. So there's been a commitment of resource, but then it hasn't produced the desired result, by which I mean, I suppose, the paid invoice, the satisfied client, the business-to-business referral for a new client. So you can almost think of it in all these ways. I mean, the straight example to think of it here is, the production of scrap. So for every, I don't know, amount of corrugated iron sheets we produce, there's the equivalent of that heap of bits on the floor that we sweep up and put in the bin. Okay, what do we do with it now? Do we literally bin it? Do we try and reprocess it ourselves? Do we sell it to someone else for reprocessing? Is there inherent value to it? Or in fact, are we going to have to pay to get it taken away? But without any of these sort of thought processes, again, we can't make decisions, or we can't make good decisions at least. I mean, there's so many absolutely brilliant examples about this and kind of reprocessing scrap material, waste material, products which may not be able to be used for their first intended purpose. So I can immediately think off the top of my head, it's a client, sorry, excuse me. Yeah, it's a client who basically produces sheds, outbuildings and fencing from sort of first cut, really high quality timber. Now, as you can imagine, there's lots and lots of offcuts. Now, we could put those in a wood skip, we could send them away, they could get shredded, we could do lots of things with those bits of wood. Or indeed, we could either reprocess them ourselves into high quality garden planters, for example, which is what this particular client does, and realizes, of course, this is an incredible second income stream. So there's an example for I mean, I think quite a good one of how using the ISOs has kind of driven us to think about, is there something else we can do with the spare bits, with the wastage, with the offcuts? Quite a good example, I think. Okay, fantastic. So we'll think then about customer satisfaction. And the scenario that everything we do in business is around meeting customers' needs. We need client organizations, customers to not only trust us, want to deal with us, but also like the products, like the service, like the way that we do business. And again, there's this whole kind of scenario around respecting the client, asking the client what the client thinks, and then taking that information on board. So, I mean, again, a few examples of, I think, how this is done well. The particular gym I'm a member of, so it's a well-known UK chain, and in their reception area, they've got the "you said, we did" boards. So, class times aren't great. Can you put on more yoga? Da, 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 da. And they'll give an explanation. So, in other words, you know, actually, lots of people asked for this. Yes, we think there's scope to run lots more yoga classes. Hooray. Gym is routinely too hot. Can you switch the heating down? You know, and the reality is probably 50% of the people think it's too hot, 50% of the people think it's too cold. That's a less easy one to answer, but it's really just taking on board the feedback and then being seen to have considered it and tried to act. And I think, again, that just wins you an awful lot of brownie points with your client base, because there's, I suppose, something very arrogant and displeasing about a service provider that doesn't take that level of feedback into account. Quite a good example there for those of you that love the gym as I do. So we're talking about, again, where ISOs kind of push you to monitor processes, outputs and feedback. So that would include client complaints. You did a terrible job. I didn't love when you did this. I hate my project manager, or whatever. You know, again, you look at all of that and you say, well, either, you know, this client manager did not do a great job in this instance. Perhaps we need to have a conversation with this project manager, or perhaps the project manager is operating out of his depth, was under tremendous time pressure to complete a difficult job for a difficult client. We kind of take all of that on board, but we are considering it and we are taking action. I think, I mean, one of the great things about customer satisfaction monitoring as well is you can use it quite effectively to understand future or unexpressed and expressed customer need. So by having that conversation with the client, and these days, again, depends on the line of work that you're in, but it could be almost like account meetings, quite high level conversations between your top guys and their top guys or girls, to try and establish almost, you know, where are we going with this next? Are we going somewhere with this next? Are you happy enough with what we've done so far? Will you use us again? Would you refer us to, you know, another sort of organization that you perhaps know that you know could use our services? So it's all the kind of things around that. I mean, what I quite like, again, within this kind of customer satisfaction piece, so I think increasingly as businesses move toward almost trying to be key partners, so you want to keep your supply chain close, you want to know about any problems they're having so that you can adjust. You want that degree of openness and honesty, I think. So this idea of kind of partnering with clients, you as the client and you as the supplier, and almost bringing the whole piece together so that you can, again, just try and predict the future in difficult and unpredictable times, I know. But again, you know, if we had, I'm trying to think of some good topical examples. There's so much going on at the moment around supply chain, and it kind of started with the blocking of the Suez Canal. And then almost since then, there's been so many issues. Will we have any toys for Christmas? Will we have a turkey for Christmas? All of these issues which are kind of rumbling away in the background. The massive increase in the cost of builders' materials, the impact that this is having on the completion of existing projects, and then maybe the knock-on effect on future projects because they have to wait until the existing sort of body of work is completed. It's been held up because not only have prices gone up, people are struggling to pay, but also just getting the materials almost at any price is more of a challenge than once it was. So quite an interesting one there. Again, difficult to achieve. I think almost don't base customer satisfaction on what your customers wanted 2 years ago, because I think here seismic changes have been wrought by the pandemic. You kind of need to start thinking maybe a little bit differently, because people may have different expectations and desires, and you need to take those into account. Okay, fantastic. So, I mean, again, my kind of hot topic, resilience and adaptability. And this scenario where I think, again, using the standards as they are intended to be used, we're really being pushed to adopt a risk-based approach to everything. So, in other words, we turn on our brains, we scan the horizon, and we kind of try and think about almost what's the next bad thing, or maybe good thing, that's going to happen. Because I think almost now we're in a scenario where the business environment, the world is changing very, very fast. You know, we're almost in a position now where lots of topics that we almost might have got away with giving a bit less attention to, like climate change, and I suppose renewable energy and supply chain issues and increasing competition for the best staff. These are all issues which have kind of suddenly come up to the top of the pot. Everything's boiling away at once. So this is where, I mean, it's a basic tool. It's been used for decades, but SWOT analysis. So thinking about almost in the context of all the stuff that's going wrong, these are the threats, but what opportunities exist as a result of these? And I've had so many conversations with organizations who say, for example, are, you know, hygiene, healthcare, contract cleaning. Actually, building has recovered really nicely as well. There's so many organizations out there that have benefited from the pandemic. It's terrible to say. People have lost their lives, people have lost their businesses, but there will be organizations out there which are in a stronger position now. Interesting. I mean, one to discuss. But again, it's this idea that we can be resilient. We can adopt, I suppose, a more kind of gracile, a more flexible approach to business. Almost anything goes these days. You know, who could have foretold 2 years ago that we would be where we are now? So this idea of driving businesses and organizations to be proactive, again, you know, being open to this idea for the opportunities that arise, you know, those might arise quite quickly. We might need to make decisions quite rapidly. We might need to deploy resources slightly differently. As I say, all interesting and I think hopefully good food for thought. Okay, so maybe what you came to hear. So this is what are we going to get out of all this? How do we stand to gain from having ISO? So we think about external benefits. So winning tenders, will having 9001 make my day, make me successful, make me the best, whatever in the world? Probably not on its own, but I think increasingly now, the tender process has come down a tier. So all organizations tend to have some exposure to formal tendering, which if you're not particularly accustomed to it, not used to it, I think organizations can be a bit horrified as to how much resource it eats up. And anything that's perceived as a shortcut or a way that you can magically turn to page 88, sign the bottom and say, here's my 9001 certificate. I haven't filled in all the questions on how I solve problems, take customer feedback, etc., all the areas that we just covered off. So I think really what we're saying is sometimes you get to page 1 of the invitation to tender and it's more or less non-ISO 9001 companies don't even bother applying, which is great because I've got my 9001 certificate. Okay, so I can turn to page 2. So what we also have found is that there's this perception almost that businesses are doing it right and having processes in place, having considered risk, being more resilient, again, just having the kind of the backing, the background, the means of, I suppose, continuing to deliver service as well. I mean, that's almost what it comes back down to again, doesn't it? That business continuity or kind of business resilience piece. Do you trust this organization that has a bright, shiny van and not much else? Or do you trust this organization that has not only supplied, you know, copies of its insurance and assurance products, it's a SMAS company, it's a 9001 company, it's a 14001 company. I immediately feel more confident in giving my business to the second organization. Again, an interesting one. So again, I think it does smooth the path to tendering. I think we're almost in a position now where, you know, I've been doing this for many decades. It probably shows on my face and my grey hair, but it was almost like back in the day, having the standards was considered almost like the differentiator, whereas now standards are becoming very well implemented. I'm not saying that it's an arms race, but you can imagine a scenario where, you know, having the differentiator might be having 45001 because more organizations have already had 9 and 14 for longer. So it's an interesting one to think about. As a certification body, we get quite a good level of awareness almost of what tenders are now asking for. It becomes very obvious, and that changes over time, but expectations only go up. They never turn back, unfortunately. Okay, fantastic. So, I mean, I suppose almost the kind of flip side of this, so we're sweating over tenders and we're thinking about, you know, how we can use our ISOs to kind of, well, really promote the business, increase the amount of business that we get, generate customer goodwill, generate more referrals, all of these good things. And it is effectively, I mean, it's a badge of success. It is the sort of exam certificate. Wave this piece of paper. I've achieved this standard. I mean, it absolutely is. And I think that it can be used really, really successfully in marketing, branding, building your reputation. For example, if you're an organization that's maybe breaking into a new geographical area, all of this good stuff, because we don't do this for nothing. We don't do this and then hide the certificate and never talk about it, do we? That's kind of what we do there. Okay. Great stuff. So I suppose really just to kind of bringing us toward the end of our presentation, just kind of thinking a wee bit more about internal and external benefits. So we've talked about some of these already. So this idea again of increased efficiency, which comes off the back of 9001. Yes, it certainly can do. Identification and resolution of issues. Yes, you hopefully will become more of a kind of NCR seeking device, and again, hopefully really drive that kind of culture of everybody tries to fix problems and make things better all of the time, because why wouldn't you? You know, every pair of hands comes with a free brain, as they used to say. Improved employee morale. Yeah, absolutely. Take the stress out of the process. Everybody knows what they're supposed to do. Everybody has the right training. Everybody knows what the escalation process is. You know, simples. Should make life easier. Right first time attitude. So this is the scenario, you know, that if we didn't have time to do it correctly and it gets screwed up, we're going to have to do it again. So there's always time to do it right first time, is what we say. Again, continual improvement. Yep, that's what we're driving toward. Externally, again, a great relationship with your supply chain and your clients, maybe higher customer satisfaction, maybe better visibility of what the client's future needs are going to be like. Wouldn't disagree with any of that. 14,001. So, I mean, again, what saves the planet also potentially saves the pocket, making cost savings. Yeah, absolutely. And I think, I mean, at the moment, it's so topical. This is literally, you know, COP26 is around the corner. This is what everybody's talking about. Trying to make the best use that we can of resources to pollute less and to basically save finite resources while we transition to renewable energy sources. Improving efficiency, yep, again, I mean, same, what saves time probably saves the planet as well. Fantastic. A framework to demonstrate legislative compliance, yes, absolutely. So there's so much out there. There's a lot of new and kind of on the horizon environmental legislation which organisations will need to take into account. So things like the energy performance of buildings, which was big news a few years ago, you know, what's coming next. So we were already talking about the phasing out of domestic boilers in favour of heat pumps, electric vehicles again, and charging points, the necessary infrastructure to support those. There's so much that is coming, and I think that'll have a big impact on loads and loads of industries, as you can imagine. Again, what does it do for your organization? Well, hopefully, you know, it increases confidence in you. You're the good guy. You're not the polluter. Proof of a forward-thinking, environmentally aware business. I mean, it's almost like you kind of have to be that now. To be anything other is probably detrimental. You would almost say that's saving you from a negative, wouldn't you? And yeah, a demonstration of your commitment to environmental performance. Yeah, absolutely. It's what we need to get out of this. I mean, on 27,001, again, it's just such a big standard at the moment. And I guess with everyone that's been driven to work from home, that may or may not have had a great VPN, that may or may not live in a shared house, that may or may not need to have physical client files at home. These are all kind of areas which I think have really boiled up to the surface again. There have been a lot of high-profile data breaches, obviously. I mean, almost daily, it seems like at the moment. And I think too, ransomware, loss of system access, loss of records, it's a very, very hot topic. And organisations which maybe 5 or 10 years ago would have said, 27001, that's not for us, are now saying it's for everyone, lead me to it. So as I say, it has become a really, really popular standard. I think too, I mean, the pandemic has really forced us to look at IT infrastructure. And what I personally am aware of is lots of organisations that have legacy systems that may not have the built-in information security features that new sort of newly procured systems may have. So there's that whole kind of piece around systems acquisition. Are we making the right decisions? IT infrastructure improvements can be really expensive. So we want to just, I suppose, have the process and the framework in place to make sure that we're making the right decisions. All big scary stuff. I mean, last one there, it's very much on my mind, I suppose, at the moment. So health and safety, 45001. It's a really, really great standard. We've talked about it here as creating a framework to demonstrate legislative and regulatory compliance. And I think it absolutely does that. It creates the framework. It doesn't do the regulatory compliance on its own, but I think that it's a very, very good kind of pathfinder standard, and it will almost, I think, direct you to the areas of your safety management system which may need work. As I say, it is a great standard. I think there's, I tend to get a lot of sort of briefings sent out around, the last person who lost a limb in an industrial accident and, almost like the worst possible outcomes. So, clearly that's a life-changing scenario for that individual. They didn't go to work that day to be injured, and yet they were. That's been the kind of the unfortunate outcome for them. And I think as organizations, we really need to think about, the kind of personal ramifications for that individual, but also the potential HSE improvement notice or fine or lack of or loss of reputation that comes out of having not a great safety record. These are all things that are the differentiators between organizations. Very, very important. I think too, again, unprecedented world events over the last 18 months. Everybody is maybe a little bit more stressed and vulnerable than once they were. Very volatile job market. Everybody's perhaps a little bit more nervous and trying to be seen to do a good job. Working from home at arm's length, you don't have the cordial support of your colleagues every day. Maybe just sitting in your spare room, typing away, trying to do as good a job as you would, maybe with less infrastructure, with less colleagues to bounce ideas off. All of these things almost sort of contribute to this idea of what the working environment is like. So again, I think there's a brilliant sort of bolt-on, so 45003, which considers the kind of psychological and the mental health elements to this standard, also a brilliant standard. Again, coming back to, I suppose, risk management within organizations, and it's very, very fundamental, obviously, to this standard too. When you think risk management, you almost immediately go to health and safety because it's kind of where we learned it first. And it continues to be really significant for this standard. We think about risks and opportunities associated with having the broader health and safety management system as well, though. So we're not just risk assessing slips, trips and falls, use of chemicals, but we're actually thinking about the management system itself too, which I think is really helpful. Again, it's broadly the same benefits that we're getting, internal and external, that we've spoken about with the other standards. I think there is this whole almost like a kind of it's like a moral obligation effectively on employers to try and make the workplace as safe as possible. There's an obligation on employees as well to protect themselves and one another and to follow instructions and use PPE, as sort of as they've been trained to do. But I think it's quite a nice way to just think about almost how we can wrap that up, how we can drive a real safety improvement culture. And I think that is what 45001 is there for. Okay, fantastic. So I am just about nearing the end of my spiel. That is 3 o'clock. And I'm going to show you some links which are on screen now, talking about basically that whole shopping list. They are all the ISO standards that are available to you, including the 4 that we've talked about today, plus many, many more. Certification process, again, obviously through QMS is there for you. And we've got some more materials online. Connect is our online portal to allow you to manage your ISOs. It's a product which was developed a few years ago. It's still being improved. It's very widely used within our existing client base. So, any questions? I'll shut up and let you do some talking now, if indeed there are any questions. My goodness, I must have covered it well. Okay, we'll just give it a second and see if there are any questions. As I say, if not, thank you very much for your attendance this afternoon. And as I say, I hope we covered that. I think we covered that in a reasonable amount of depth. So as I say, any questions that you want to put after the fact, we've got marketing@qmsuk.com. As I say, if nobody can think of anything just now or is brave enough to put any questions up, then that's fine. We'll probably, there we go. We'll probably kind of leave it at that point. But yeah, as I say, thank you very much for your attendance. I really hope that was helpful. It's such a good topic, and I think the standards have never been more relevant than they are now, although I've been saying that for 20 years. So as I say, that's great. So thank you very much. And I'll let you go and live your lives. See you at a future webinar, perhaps. Thank you very much.